Hey guys, Dr. Dex here. Today we are doing a question and answer session. We've had quite a few questions come through from our Instagram page. And I have a guest here today, Z-Deck man, Nazih. He's part of our team here at Dr. Dex, and we happen to be here at the crib in the lab, bending some deck boards today, and thought it'd be a good time. We're in between heating sessions, so thought we'd do this Q&A real quick and bust this out for you. So here's our first question. As a percentage, how much more work goes into a curve versus a straight line? Say just a bow front deck, and is that a linear increase or an exponential increase if additional curves are added? Usually we charge accordingly as far as curves go. Usually there's a lot more work involved in curves than there are straight lines. Straight lines are easy and quick. We do a lot of curves because we like to add that pizzazz to our decks. I think it helps us sell the deck versus having to compete with a lot of other people. We find people really enjoy our designs and embrace them quite well. So with that, I would say as far as pricing or does it cost more? Yeah, it does cost more. Sometimes on the borders, it's a lineal foot price increase, but sometimes I'll just increase the price of the deck depending on how much complexity there is in the curves and the beams and extra footings and all that stuff. But in a percentage standpoint, I'd say depending on the complexity of the curves, it can be anywhere from 20 to 40% more depending on how complex the actual shape of the deck is. I don't know, what do you think, Naz? As far as building them, what do you feel?
Yeah, I would say curves are definitely more of a process, more detailed with like a straight board. All you have to do is just line it up, make sure you're 16 on center and install. With a curved board, there's definitely more thought, planning, even setting up a jig for a curved board is more complex. So there's more of a process, but I think it definitely sets us apart and comes out good in the end.
Right on. All right, here's some more questions. What are the two most common deck failures you see when replacing an existing deck? So what do you see, Naz? I'll let you go first.
The most common thing I would see is people that would not space their deck boards enough. And so when you don't space them enough, or you space them too much, collects pine needles, especially in Washington State, water, and that just gets on top of the top face of the joist and then just rots it from top down. And I mean, I see a little bit, depending if it's a cedar deck, you'll also see the cedar boards rotting from the top down as well. But more often than not, I see, just spacing not done properly, and then it just ruins the framing.
I agree with Nazih. The deck board crack, and that's why we use so much G-tape, because we like to protect that space in between the deck boards where all that sediment's going to sit. And that's a native Washington State thing where we have so many pine trees. All those pine needles collect. That's the first place they collect. If you're not out there cleaning, blowing, or pressure washing your deck every month, those are going to collect and they're going to start to rot. So when we tear down decks, that's the first place we see failures in the joist. The next place we see failure are in the beams. So in the beams and sometimes at the base of a post. Those are probably the three most common spots that we see failure. The post base, either because it's continually getting wet or it's in the dirt. A lot of times it's just sitting in dirt. And there's a footing, but you still have dirt packed around it, and that just rots the post out. And then a lot of times we'll see a beam failure where the top of the beam, again, there's no protection, and the water just sits up on top of a flat spot. Water's always going to sit on a flat spot. It's not always going to rot off, and then it's going to sit there and rot. Here's another one. When installing a ledger on a brick veneer and the interior wall is finished, are there any tips or tricks you use to minimize the repair? Well, I know that Simpson has a new bracket out that allows you to not have to go inside the house and tear the sheetrock out when you're going through brick. So that's always a scary circumstance. There's not a lot of brick houses where we work or where we live, but I know Simpson has an answer for you now. So go check out strongtie.com and get your answer there. When a client does not want to get a permit, what do you tell them? How do you educate them regarding the risks? Well, usually what I tell them is, depending on your jurisdiction, if a deck is under 30 inches off the ground, then no permit is required. But there are certain jurisdictions where I live that they have implemented that that doesn't apply. If there is a fire escape going onto the deck, then a permit is required. I'm not always down with that, but that's the rule. So it's always in your best interest. If you're not sure, check with your local building department. I'll tell a homeowner, let's check with your local building department. And, if they can either pay me to do this or they can save themselves some money and go do it themselves. But a lot of times, if we're under that threshold, we don't get permits. But a lot of times we are getting permits, and then there could be engineering. And I tell clients, look, it can be anywhere from $2,000 to $5,000 for a building permit between all the drawings, all the construction drawings, if there's engineering that's required, and then we need an engineer stamp, and then the application, plus the permit fee. Permit fees have gone way up. They used to be a couple $100. Now they're anywhere from $200 to $1,200 to $1,500, even more, depending on how greedy the jurisdiction is and how much money they want to take from you. Okay, got anything to add to that?
Not really.
No? Okay. All right, here's another one. What would you do to prevent frost footing heaving? Well, okay, so where we live in Washington State, the frost depth is only 12 to 18 inches deep, so we don't really have footing heave here. So if I was in a really cold climate, I would be using helical piles. Your other option may be diamond piers, but you'd have to check with that company to see if that would work in your jurisdiction or your location and your local building department. Have you heard of anything else as far as heave?
Nothing
Frost
I
heave?
know of, no. Not in this area, at least.
Yeah, I know nobody's down to dig 7 feet deep.
Right.
Neither am I. So that would be your best bet. Helical piles. Where I live, in our region, I think there's only one guy that does them around here. And I heard he's pretty busy. So I know that pin foundations, diamond pier pin foundations, they're making new foundation pins and piers that work with houses as well. So that might be something to look into. So check them out, diamondpier.com. Are all the railings going to be glass on both levels? This person's asking about our new build that we're working on right now. And the answer is yes, except for a couple spots we're going to have some privacy screens. And then what are the requirements as far as height of the glass, thickness, and post-to-post spacing? The requirement is the glass has to be 36 inches off the surface of the deck. The thickness is 3/8 or 10 millimeter, and the post-to-post spacing is no more than 5 feet. Naz, you can answer this one. Do you leave your cut hub set up the whole time you're on a job with the saws in place, or do you take it down every night?
Well, we personally leave it up ideally from the first day we're there to the last day we're there. I suppose if you're really ambitious, you could take it down every night because it's not a hard system to install and deconstruct. But we personally leave it up with the saws on, and we just make sure we cover the saws with garbage sacks or something like that so that they're not hitting the elements and staying protected.
We also have saw hoods that protect 80% of the saw, and then the garbage sack protects the other 20%. So the saw is staying completely dry regardless of wind, rain, snow. And then we actually had one job where it was in a high-risk neighborhood. There was a lot of homeless people that were coming and taking anything that we didn't put away. So every day we had a locked trailer. They wouldn't break into the trailer. They would just take stuff. If I left my battery out because I was on a GoPro and I came back from Friday, it was gone on Monday. So we did have to dismantle the cut hub every day for 3 months. And that was kind of difficult, but we got over it. And, once you get in the rhythm, and we spray painted the ground, so it took us, an extra 15 minutes to set up and 15 minutes to break down every day. But I felt it was really worth it because we didn't want that investment just walking off the job site. All right, here's a question. How do you like the Fasten Master screws? We really like Fasten Master brand products. We really like the ledger locks, the timber locks. We use a ton of those. Those are our two most used probably. Right. And then the guard dog screws, the 3.5s. We use a lot of those. We're kind of sold on that brand, really like that product. When something works, you don't usually change it. You just kind of go with it. So, and then Nazih knows all about Cortex.
Yeah, Cortex
tell them about
cool.
Cortex.
Yeah, so Cortex is cool because we personally use a stainless steel option. But Fasten Master provides you with a depth setter that has a little felt cushion on the end, and I believe it's a T20?
Yep.
T20? Yeah, so then you just find out where you want to screw it down, and that depth setter will stop you from ruining the board or going down too deep. And then it makes a perfect hole for your Cortex plugs. And then you just take a hammer, plug those, make sure the grain's lined up with your board, smack them down, and then you don't see the fasteners. So.
You can do a search here on YouTube for Cortex or drdecks Cortex, and you can find lots of videos. We're using Cortex all the time, and it's probably the greatest invention that Fasten Master's come up with. I mean, we love the structural drive screws. Don't get me wrong. Construction screws and structural drive screws are very important to make sure the deck doesn't collapse. But then for cosmetic reasons, we love the Cortex because basically you can hide just about any fastener you want on the surface of the deck, and it remains a hidden fastened deck. Why didn't you install the bladder before you installed the skirting? I think it just boiled down to scheduling. We didn't have certain parts there for the skirting. We had the bladder there. Well, wait, no, we didn't have the bladder ready. We had the skirting materials, so we got the skirting going, and then we ran the bladder. It's just kind of a sequence of events. We didn't have some of the blocking ready. There was just some parts that weren't ready for it. So we went ahead and got skirting done to keep the guys going, and then got to the bladder when we were able and ready to. What are your determining factors when deciding between using Dexter-Dry and an EPDM bladder system? Basically, the difference between the two is if I have curved surface borders that are going through the deck and I'm cutting all the boards and I'm trying to seam all the boards, you can't keep that dry with a Dexter-Dry system. It's impossible. So we have to do a bladder system on decks of that type. If we're doing any type of surface borders, it's really hard to do Dexter-Dry with them as well. So that's why we do the bladder quite often versus the Dexter-Dry. I don't have any problem using Dexter-Dry. As a matter of fact, I'm going to be using a little bit of both, mostly bladder and some Dexter-Dry on our current deck build. So keep an eye out for that. That'll be coming maybe next week. What kind of wood is that? Is that a joke? I'm going to let you answer this one.
Well, yeah, I know guys in different parts of the country have different wood, but here in Washington State, we use a pressure-treated hemlock. So those little holes or incisions you see are actually staple marks from the lumber company pushing to get that, the end cut solution or the solution that actually holds the pressure treatment deep inside the wood. More often than not, though, when we cut those boards and you look at the end, you only realize that treatment only goes in about, what is it, maybe a quarter of an inch at most?
Quarter to a half inch, yeah.
So that's why we use Q-Tech, because on all our end cuts, you put that on the end, and that stuff soaks through into the wood and fully protects your investment, because you don't want to build a deck with AZEK, for example, has a 50-year warranty on some wood that's only going to last 10 years.
Yeah, so. True. Good job. Good answer. That would have been my answer. When you're doing a double angled deck with spine detailing and picture frame, what is the maximum and minimum angles you prefer to use? You know, when you're doing curves, you could have a really obtuse 85-degree angle or 75-degree angle, and you just got to roll with it. So I'll just do whatever I can. If I have to, I may end up pinning the end of a wedge of a deck board from the side with a screw, and I'll put a little spacer. I'll make custom spacers that are the same width as our gap in our decking, and I'll glue all that stuff together with some 2P10 or something, and then I'll run a stainless steel screw through it to keep that wedge from popping. Because when you're coming on a point like this, and then you're curving, and then it comes to a point, that piece is going to want to lift. Maybe this isn't answering this question, but it's kind of important when you think about it. So usually on my work, you'll see maybe a spacer that's subset from the top of the deck just a little bit, same color as the decking, but it's all glued together that'll keep that wedge, that tight wedge, down so that it's not lifting up. Because I've had callbacks in the past where I spaced or I just didn't do it or whatever, and that little tiny piece of PVC in the hot is going to like pull up like this. So there's my answer. So there's really not a set angle. I'll just roll with it. But you know, we work on 45s, 22.5s, and things like that. But when you're working on circles, it's every angle under the sun. All right, guys, thanks for watching. We really appreciate it. If you're on Instagram, don't forget to give Deckman a follow and follow yours truly, Dr. Decks. We really appreciate you watching. If you like what you saw today or learned a little something or we answered your questions, don't forget to click that subscribe button. Hit the bell icon every time you want to be notified that we're putting out fresh content. And for those of you that want to learn how to bend deck boards, don't forget to go sign up for Dr. Deck's Masterclass. Thank you very much. Have a great day.